Hello, Larry. How you doing today?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm happy and honored to have you in our podcast today. Thank you very much for jumping in such a period of time. We appreciate your
All right. Thank you
presence
for having me.
and your insight you're going to share in our podcast today. So you're very welcome. Hello, viewers. We have a very important guest today. His name is Larry Chism. He's CEO of Quantum Management Resource. They provide a wide range of services, including in area of AI, the LLM, the SDR, and also recruitment and talent management. So today we're going to relax and draw from his insight of how he has built a great company he has today. Larry, you're welcome.
Great. Thank you for
So
having me. Appreciate it.
yeah, before we start, I just want to make it clear, set the tone to let you know that the podcast is just in the three main categories of questions. First, we'll start with, with your background and the industry trend you're seeing. We discuss your current challenges and where you want quantum management resource to be in the next 6, 12 months. And finally, we wrap up with if there's any next step to take. Does that sound like a good use of our time?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Uh,
So I guess I'll just start briefly, kind of give you a quick overview of my background. So I've been
okay.
a talent acquisition professional now for a little over 25 years. And so
Awesome.
I've seen a lot in the business over the years.
Hmm.
Actually, to kind of step back a little bit from there, I started my career in retail management. And so from there, I was a manager for a clothiers company called Brooks Brothers, and I had managed a number of stores for them up here in the Northeast. And so, ironically, one of my clients recruited me to work for them, and that's how I kind of got into the recruitment space, working for a small retail recruiting boutique firm. And from there, that's kind of where I started my career and built it. During my tenure, I've seen a lot, seen a lot of changes in the business. Technology, I think, is probably maybe the consistent theme that has been really, the major force of change. When I first started in the business, the internet as we know it today was just starting, and so with that, that played a significant impact in really influencing our value proposition and how we presented our services to our clients. And then fast forward a little bit from there, then enter social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and the other such as that also has impacted the business landscape, personally and professionally, and again, has influenced how we, provide our value services to our clients. And now, as of late, the big theme now is AI. And so again, another technology shift in terms of how that has changed the landscape business wise. And so I'll have, obviously a couple of thoughts to share about that. Um, but for the most part, as a recruiter, I've had the opportunity to recruit for a lot of different industry spaces. So from retail to IT to healthcare, you name it, I've had an opportunity to recruit within that space. And as a recruiter, I've done contract staffing, I've done permanent placement or what they call headhunting,
Mhm.
and I've also done some retained search. And so these are things that I'll talk about during our call as well. And for the past 15 years now, I've been running my own practice, solopreneur, if you will, providing staffing and recruiting services. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Great, that's a very good one. So, what's core philosophy? What is the core philosophy behind quantum management resource approach in helping clients?
I'm going to have to repeat that one more time because the volume was a little bit low. But
Yeah.
go ahead. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Sorry.
What was your
Okay. So,
question again?
what is the core philosophy behind the quantum management resource approach to helping clients?
Sure. So I guess, from my perspective, the unique value proposition that I bring to my clients, aside from obviously helping them to identify the best possible talent, is really the experience of being able to understand their internal business. I think
Yeah.
that an important part of really being successful in identifying the right talent is understanding your clients. What are their challenges? What are their internal growing pains? What are their external growing pains and challenges? And with that, I think, for myself, I bring in that unique business understanding of really understanding, what are some of the challenges that my clients go through. As of that, much of my activity during my years has worked with a lot of startups and SMBs. Especially startups, because these are companies that, again, just starting out, they're going through a lot of challenges. Some of them are just internal growth challenges. Others are trying to carve out a niche in a competitive, industry space. And then just a lot of other factors that, that they confront. And so to have someone that has a talent acquisition background, but an appreciation for many of the challenges and turbulence that they'll encounter, I think provides an extra added value. And so that's kind of, I think, what makes me a bit different than many other staffing firms out there, especially small firms that are able to provide a qualitative and reliable service.
Okay, awesome. Okay, what's the major shift you're seeing in your industry right now? The major shift.
Well, I can say, and again, this is just my personal professional opinion, but obviously, the big theme that's being talked about now is AI. But here's the thing: I caution people's either fears or concerns about that, because obviously, with any quote unquote new concept, there's going to be a lot of attention drawn to it, good, bad, indifferent, and so forth. And from my perspective, in many ways, I mean, yes, this is different from other technology shifts in the past, but because there's been so much focus on it, I would say that right now, that has been probably the major central talking theme by a lot of companies. Having said that, we're really still in the early stages of a lot of that being implemented, because again, it's a relatively new resource, and like any product or service out there, it's not perfected, and so there's still going to be continuous improvements. Right now, there are a lot of products out there that are very good, and then there are products out there that, quite frankly, very bad, and then everything else is kind of in between. And
Yeah.
so, also too, depending on what industry space you operate from, whether it be technology, healthcare, or the legal space, that will influence both your perspective and, quite frankly, the need and necessity to incorporate AI as part of your daily operations or future operations. So again, you have different industries that are addressing it from different perspectives. So I would just say right now that although it's a major talking theme, the verdict is still out. Let's say in 5 or 10 years, once it's been perfected and it's out there for a while, and companies have had a chance to really digest it and understand how they can apply it to their business, then you'll get really more substantive views about the potency and the impact from, hopefully, I would say, from a positive constructive standpoint, than right now, where you just kind of have a lot of different opinions. Some of them valid, some of them more speculative, and that's kind of my thoughts.
Okay, that's well said. Quantum Management Resource offers a range of services. Can you elaborate
hmm
on a key area of specialty, in particular, particularly in recruitment and talent placement with firms and management consulting?
Sure.
Should I?
So as I mentioned earlier in my comments, I've had the opportunity to recruit in a lot of different spaces. So I've done contract staffing, and actually, let me just kind of step back for those of us, or those in the audience that may or may not be clear with the particulars. So in the recruiting world, there's different recruiting approaches. There's temp
Mhm.
placement. These are probably terms that people are familiar with. Contract staffing, permanent placement, and retained search. Yeah, temp placement is pretty much what it sounds like.
Mm.
These are assignments that are for a temporary basis. They could be anywhere from literally a day to 30 days, depending on the assignment and so forth. And they typically tend to be more junior level or service level type of positions and such. Contract staffing, that's kind of a cousin of temp placement. The assignments tend to be a little bit longer. They can be anywhere from 3 months to 6 months, a year, maybe even 2 years, again, depending on the position itself. And they tend to deal with more mid-level career positions, some senior level career positions, in many cases, non-management and so forth. But you'll find a lot of tech positions like, software engineers, accounting and finance, positions like that you'll find, being conducted in the contract staffing space. And then there's permanent placement. That's pretty much what it sounds like. Companies are looking to hire people to work for them permanently and such. And so I've done that. And the last but not least, retained search. Now, retained search is a unique service provider in the capacity that, its relationship with the clients are much more intimate, much more partnership related, because you're required to really have a deeper knowledge and understanding of what is going on with that company. But also in a retained search, they're typically utilized by companies that are looking for either unique positions where you can't find in the general population of candidates out there. They may be positions that are uniquely customized to that particular company's needs and requirements. They tend to be maybe senior level or C-suite positions where they're looking for people that have a particular skill set or relationships within certain domains. So again, and they also tend to carry higher salary bandwidth in those kinds of services. So those are the different areas that I've worked in during my tenure. Now, in terms of what I predominantly function right now, it's predominantly contract staffing, permanent placement, and I'm now gearing my practice more to its retained search. Ultimately, if you ask me the question, which I think you may have did a moment ago, ultimately my goal is to move more towards a retained search space because of both my background, my experience and my time in the business, and my unique understanding and appreciation for understanding the growing pains and challenges of individual companies, and how I can apply both my knowledge and appreciation of that from a talent acquisition perspective and really help guide them to identify the best possible people. And so what does that mean in simple terms? I'll give you a very simple example. You can have two individuals that may look pretty much the same in terms of skills and experience on paper, obviously same amount of time in the business, similar skill sets, and so forth. And so, but when you begin to talk to them or qualify them or screen them individually, that's when you start to understand the distinctions and differences between the two individuals. So let's say you place them in a similar job where, let's say the job may deal with high stress and high demand, kind of what I would use a pressure cooker environment. One candidate, gravitates to it like a dry sponge to water. They can't get enough. And then you have another candidate that kind of applies a deer in the headlights look. They kind of freeze up and they don't know what to do. And so this is where you kind of now find the differences. And what does that mean? Well, that means basically that in applying that approach, it's important to understand that with a particular client, what are the challenges that they're going through? So if they're looking for people that have a certain amount of skill sets, that's important, but that may not be the entire recipe. And so they may be going through a lot of unconventional situations where they need someone that can walk and chew gum at the same time without being handheld. And this is where the distinction comes into play.
I think you even answered the next question I want to ask you, which is how do you typically assess a client's current state and identify their most pressing challenge in talent acquisition and management? Like, do you want to throw more light on that? Because I think this is your question. I mean, you answered
no,
kind
sure.
of.
That goes very much so. I'll to dovetail and just my prior comments. And so if you apply that to a company, let's say that's a startup. They're going through a lot of different pressures. They're going through pressures from investors that are looking for a return on their investment. They're going through challenges on trying to carve a niche inside of what probably may be a very competitive landscape. They're going through growing pains, because the goal here is that they're starting out small, but they're looking to scale their business. But they also need people that understand how to operate in a small environment, but also be able to evolve and grow with the larger, as a company, becomes larger and grows. And not everybody may necessarily be able to do that successfully. They may be able to grow with the company until maybe, let's say, it employs people from, let's say, 10 people to maybe 50 up to 100, and then they've reached their bandwidth. Now you have to bring in someone else that's more familiar and experienced with operating in businesses that, let's say, employ 100 people or more, and then they can take that company to the next level because they know how to deal with companies and growth from that vantage point. So again, it's like taking a Walmart, Okay, they're obviously a multi-billion-dollar, corporation, global, and so forth. Well, you can't apply the same business principles from a Walmart to a family, drugstore or a family, store, that serves only a community. They're different business models, and they're designed to
Yeah.
operate in different business climates. It's a very simplistic example, but I think you get the principle of it. And so you can reverse
Yeah.
that and say, okay, well, someone who may be experienced and skilled in operating and functioning within a small business may have a more difficult time operating and applying those same skills in a larger environment where there's more employees, more infrastructure, more bureaucracy, things of these natures that interfere or not interfere, but but that involve and collude with how they navigate through the everyday week month in terms of how they conduct their job. So again, you're taking the skill sets of the trade, and you're marrying that with the skill sets of the landscape and the work environment. And hopefully, if you have someone that can blend the two together, then that's how both one, they're set up for success, and two, the company is set up to receive the benefits of a very talented individual.
Awesome. Well said. So, what is working well for you right now, and what has been frustrating?
Well, I mean, right now, they say timing is everything, and you're catching me at a point where I'm looking at recalibrating my practice. Like I said, I have, been doing, recruiting for a number of years. I've operated and functioned, in that capacity. But now, given that I'm kind of, much later in my career, I'm looking at kind of shifting my focus. Much of my activity had been really diversified between different industry verticals, and that has served me well in many times, especially during times where the economy may not have been doing great, and some industry sectors may be having a bit more turbulence than others. It has allowed me to shift gears and function and go where the work is abundant and such. But now I'm looking to kind of narrow that focus into maybe three or four key areas, and that's where I'm looking to basically solidify my practice. In addition to my service offerings, I indicated contract staffing, perm placement, retained search. Well, I'm looking to gear my practice more towards a retained search business model because it allows me to again develop a stronger bond with my clients. And the goal there is obviously creating true partnerships and long-term relationships.
Awesome. Well said. So, how do you currently measure success in a company right now?
Well, success, I guess it's like any situation. The bottom line is, you're either generating revenue or you're not. Everything that you do is really contingent upon meeting that aim. I mean, of course, yes, your success is measured between, your clients, and their satisfaction with your work. Which means that obviously, the goal there is that you earn repeat business. The other area is obviously, are you being able to establish yourself and carve yourself into new niches or new relationships, and such, and being able to generate, those relationships into revenue producing activity as well. So for me, success right now, is going through the transition of basically, transforming my business from what it used to be to what I want it to be, which again is more towards a retained search format. Really trying to establish and build myself within a particular, key areas. Legal space is one of them. IT, I've always done, but healthcare, biotech, pharma is an area that I also want to cultivate. And engineering, construction is a venue that I've been doing a lot of work in as well. So those are kind of the three major areas, but legal will probably be the top one, followed by the others, which is where I'm looking at transition my practice. So when I measure success, my success there, is geared towards my successful transition
Mm.
into those areas. So right now I'm at the early stages of that, but the goal is hopefully within the next 12, to 18 months, I would have established myself both, from a revenue standpoint as well as developing new client relationships. I've gotten off to a good start this year, especially in the legal space. But the goal is to continue that and build on that. And hopefully, by year's end and going into the early part of next year and moving forward, I will see myself, at least in the position where I am positioned now for greater growth.
Yeah. What kind of service do you intend to provide in a legal space? Are you
Oh,
an attorney
no,
or
staffing, staffing, recruiting,
okay,
of course.
definitely. Oh,
Yeah, no, yeah, that is my primary service. Right now, it's just really what industry sectors do I want to target and focus my efforts towards. But staffing and
mm,
recruiting is a primary service. That said, because of my experience, what my clients also will receive from me is, what I would call, I guess, additional perspective. Because although, staffing and recruiting are ultimately the acts, that is the ultimate service. Identifying someone and matching them with the right company in the right position. But there are a number of things, in my view, that need to occur to successfully come to that outcome. And part of that really is understanding the inner workings of a company. And so many of the questions and inquiries, at least in the service, may not appear to have much to do with staffing, but they do.
yeah.
Because, how can you identify the right people for the right opportunities if you're not sure that their background, meaning a candidate, has set them up for success to function and operate within an environment that this particular company may be operating under, that they need people that can obviously be able to transition successfully and be able to obviously help them succeed and build within that environment.
Awesome. Well said. So, is there any metrics you are most focused on improving right now to make sure you're in the right direction?
I'm gonna have you repeat that again. What
So,
was that now?
is there any metrics that you're focused on improving right now to make sure you're in the right direction?
Well, yes. I mean, one metric is obviously client acquisition now, but this is it's a great question, but it's also it's an important question because metrics are you need metrics in any business, so I'll just
Yeah.
start off from that. But to kind of get more narrow, in the recruiting world, and I mentioned to you earlier about temp placement, contract staffing, perm placement, and so forth, all of them have metrics, but the metrics, are are set up differently in some ways. So, for example, in temp and contract placement, there's a lot of volume activity that's contingent upon being successful
Mhm.
in that type of environment. Because, especially in the temp environment, you're really dealing with a lot of high volume, fast pace. So when you talk about metrics, you're talking about obviously you talk about client acquisition, you talk about candidate placements, you talk about in terms of number of recruiting calls, a number of other types of ancillary activities that build up to the to the results that you're trying to achieve. You know, on the other spectrum, when you look at retained search, well, yes,
Yeah.
metrics are important in terms of how many clients you acquire and how many placements you make. But the process there is a bit different and it's a bit slower and it's a bit more deeper and more involved because of the nature of the assignments that you're working on. So if you're being hired to identify or source a chief financial officer or maybe a director of this or maybe some type of uniquely skilled a high end position like that, then obviously the ultimate metric is identifying someone that matches that company and the requirements and placing them. But you're not going to be going out and getting 100 people and throwing
Yeah.
whatever's on the wall and see what sticks. If you do that, you're not going to have a client for very long because they're not interested. They're more interested in quality than quantity. So it's a
Yeah.
balance of how you manage those activities contingent upon the
Mm,
kind of staffing recruiting that you provide that will gauge
yeah.
what the metric formula looks like.
Awesome. Well said. One thing I've also realized in a retainer search, most times
Yeah.
it could be global. The need could be global.
Sure.
It's not just well, I say one country. It could be somebody outside United States or a position outside United States. So why I'm saying that, why I'm getting back to that is that, do you have any pipeline for candidate on that in that arena, or is it when the need comes? Or do you have a network kind of or existing database? I don't know the right word, whether it's
Yeah.
database or pipeline now for that wide range of top because it's usually top management that
Right.
kind
No.
of
No. No.
connect here. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no. That's a great question. And
Hmm.
yes, short answer, yes. There are resources that you need to bring to bear that will allow
Okay.
you access to to source and identify and reach out and connect with those individuals. And so, yes, I mean, there are resources out there right now that utilize, and I'll bring AI back into the equation, that utilize AI to really help them, look for individuals, in different spaces with different skill sets to identify them. The goal in this particular case is, especially when you're dealing with, let's say, retained search, is to
Mm,
identify passive candidates. These are
mm.
individuals that may not necessarily be looking for opportunities, but
Absolutely.
you kind of call them at the right time with the
Hmm.
right opportunity. They kind of give you some time to talk to them about that opportunity, and then before you know it, you're moving forward and hopefully place them in an opportunity that appeals to them. So, but yes, there are different types of resources from resume databases to software that actually goes out and data mines, resources like Google, like search engines like Google and and um, and um, and Yahoo and Internet Explorer and so forth, because there are people out there everywhere. I kind of equate it to deep sea fishing, if you will. There are programs out there that allow you to kind of go out there and target specific individuals with certain skill sets wherever they may exist. Now, yes, when you're dealing with firms that may have a global footprint, that becomes even
Yeah.
more imperative because now
Yeah.
you're looking at expanding your sourcing landscape, not just maybe in, let's say, mainland US. Now you're looking at maybe people in Europe, and so forth. And again, and not just their skill sets, but what relationships they may have. What is it that they may have that is intuitive and conducive to someone succeeding in that particular role? I'll give you an example. I had a client some years ago. They were headquartered in Spain and they were looking to make inroads here in the US. And so one of their challenges, obviously, was establishing themselves here in the mainland. So part of my function with them was helping them to identify business development professionals that have relationships within the market. This was specifically within the healthcare arena and some others, where these are people that were established. They had literally networks and relationships, within decision makers within these particular industry spaces. So my job was to help this particular client, come together with these professionals. These professionals, in representing that particular company, would be kind of the face, if you will, and the first impression of them being able to provide their services to these companies operating in the U.S. So again, bridging that gap,
Yeah.
and both, the knowledge and the skills base, that was an important, ability. And what allowed me to do that was much of what I mentioned to you earlier, being able to, tap into resources that allow me to obviously surf the net, both, profiles like LinkedIn, or external resources, it could be, university sites. I have alma mater,
Yeah.
databases where there could be professionals that former Harvard grads or what have you that keep some type of connection with their alma mater, and that's another way of reaching them. Or firms, or companies out there where they may have a social footprint, and maybe communicate them or reach out to them through Facebook. Whatever apparatus that they may have a social media footprint, this allows me to tap into them, reach out to them, introduce myself, and hopefully connect to them with the right opportunity, and then obviously cultivate the relationship and the conversation from there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well said. And you really have your flowers. I'm giving you flowers. Okay. Where do you want quantum management resource to be in the next 6, 12 months?
Say again now.
Where do you want quantum management resource to be in the next 1 year? Let's, yeah.
Yeah. I'll repeat what I said earlier. So the goal here is to basically just transition my practice to those three to four industry verticals. Obviously, to establish more clients within those spaces, in terms of the type of recruiting services to be able to provide both, either basic contract, perm, and retained search, emphasis on retained search within those companies, within those domains. And I guess the last part of that is to be positioned in such a way that, do I want to grow my practice in terms of employing others to work for it? And if so, what would that look like? Will it be through a partnership? Will it be through some other business model apparatus? I'm not sure, but these are the things that I'm looking at. So that's kind of, where I'm at right now. That's where I'm hoping to kind of have a firmer foundation a year from now. And then, obviously from that point forward, establish at least a foundation which I can build from there. So that's kind of, where I'm at.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. You have this policy of you work until the set goal is achieved at no additional cost. Can you share a specific example of a challenging client problem you've solved and the transformation they experience?
Oh, okay. Um, well, there was a client that I worked with some years ago. This is an
Mm.
engineering assignment. They were looking for, actually, it's an interesting story. They were looking for some electrical engineers. And so this particular company, and I recruited electrical engineers for in other assignments, but this particular one was really challenging. Actually, it was probably one of my most challenging assignments. But later on, I learned to find out a couple of things. But basically, they were looking to fill four positions, and I was
Yeah.
successful in helping them identify three individuals to fill three of them. And so, but their requirements were very strict, very stringent. They literally had to have exactly everything that they're looking for on the requirements. If they didn't have one thing, they weren't interested in them. So it was really that strict. And that's where it was uniquely challenging. So identifying people, pre-screening them, qualifying them, making sure that from a skill standpoint, they had all the boxes checked off. And then, as I indicated, other aspects of them. Did they have the characteristics to work within a demanding environment like that? So the long and the short of it is that I was successful in identifying three out of the four positions to help them fill and such. And so, later on, I had asked my client, I said, I gotta, tell you that was a pretty difficult assignment, that you presented to me. And I said, if I may ask, what were the particular, reasons behind that? And so they later had explained to me that obviously these individuals would be working for one of their top clients. And I found out that that top client was NASA, National
Oh,
Aeronautic and Space Administration. So I'm like, well, that explains everything. These are
yeah.
people that put, people on the moon and
Yeah.
the shuttle programs and anything space.
Mm.
They handle that. So I can understand now why the criteria was so strict. And so that's how
Yeah.
I was able to help them identify the right people, both one be successful, in terms of their firm, but also please their end client, which was NASA. So that was just a clear example of something that I was able to contribute to because of obviously, the effort that I put into that recruiting assignment and obviously the success that I was able to achieve in finding the right people for them and obviously the success that they achieved in being able to satisfy their client. So I think that's probably maybe the most vivid example I can give you of that.
Awesome. Well said. Okay. What kind of long-term impact do you aim to have on your client businesses?
Um, I think I know what you mean. I may have already answered that, but I'll have you ask that
Yeah,
question
I
again.
know. In fact, you answer a lot of things, but because I just feel
Sure.
okay, let's still maybe know more. You've
Yeah.
answered it somehow, but can we tell us more, throw more light on that?
I'm
What
sorry. I'm going
kind
to
of,
have you repeat that again. You
yeah,
was
the
kind of low.
question is what kind of long-term impact do you aim to have on your client businesses?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm going to have to answer that as a TBD to be to be continued.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I know.
TBC, the to be
Yeah,
continued
to
now.
be clear. Mhm.
Or to be determined, I should say. Um, because of the nature of where I'm shifting my practice. I mentioned to you earlier again
Mm.
that in the retained search space, which is ideally where I want to gear my practice towards, when you talk about long-term impact, well, then there it is. That's kind of explains itself in a way because if you're able to insert yourself as really a working part of their business, their operations, their practice, then you've successfully made yourself an invaluable resource. So the impact is kind of speaks for itself because they trust you. You've built a level of trust both in your service that you provide and being able to deliver, and obviously in being able to communicate with them and interact with them on a level that they are able to share important information for you to be again competent and able to deliver your services. The impact itself would obviously manifest itself in their success, and the fact that they have utilized you and relied on you as part of that strategy in building their success. So that, I guess, kind of answers your question in terms
Yeah.
of where I see myself going in terms
Yeah.
of the
Good.
impact
Great.
and impact on my client's business.
Yeah. Awesome. So, what are some common misconceptions clients have about implementing AI solution in their talent acquisition or process management? How do you address that?
Well, that's a complicated. I don't want to say a complicated question, but there's not AI is not a one size fits all, and anyone that sees it that way needs to reevaluate that because
Mm,
it's not. And when I mentioned to you earlier about different industries and how they function and how they incorporate or how they identify AI as a resource to them will
mm,
be very much different than, let's say, a company in the legal space may look at it very much different than a company in the healthcare space. They're not the same
mm.
thing. So that's a multifaceted response that I could would take too long to give you an answer on. I can
Yeah.
slice one vertical and say that, let's say, for example, in the legal space, I think AI can play a factor, but there are many aspects of the legal space that AI really won't. I don't say won't have much of an impact, but it's difficult to see what the impact it will have can and offer because you're talking about let's say firms that may provide litigation services for a particular you know um, you know uh, uh, you know um, agreements or companies that are maybe engaging on intellectual property issues or things of that nature to um, merger and acquisition situations and challenges. I mean, there's different types of work product that are engaged in there, but AI is really right now, if it's being utilized for anything, it's probably being utilized both as an information gatherer and organizer. Um, in that capacity, and that can be helpful. But in terms of individual judgment, navigating through potential potholes or landmines of the legal landscape, that relies completely on an individual's both experience and intuitive know-how on how to function in those kinds of environments. And until they make an operating, thinking AI situation that can talk and think like a human being in that capacity, which I'm kind of going science fiction here a little bit, um, that's going to be the limit in terms of where AI can impact that particular industry. Whereas maybe in technology, it's a whole different gamut. So I
Yeah.
think the nature of your question has multi prongs to it, and there's no
Yeah.
simple answer to you. All I
Okay.
can say is, as a talent acquisition expert and professional, all I can do is say, both for myself and my peers who are also talent acquisition professionals, that how we understand AI as a resource in our day to day, both in identifying talent, qualifying talent, placing talent, that we're in a unique spot where it can have a huge impact in the job market where
Mm.
people who are trying to identify and apply for opportunities may have either an easier time or more difficult time based on some of the challenges that they may encounter. Simple
Awesome.
example, you may have people right now, not may, there are people out right now that are having a very difficult time being considered for opportunities because basically either they're not even getting to the initial phone screening stage because maybe their resume doesn't meet a certain keyword search algorithm, or if they don't fall within the first batch of 20 or 30 resumes, they're not even looked at. These are people that may be qualified for these positions, but they don't even meet, or are even allowed to kind of knock on the door to be considered because of maybe certain AI resources that maybe from a recruiter standpoint, makes our day a bit more productive and efficient, and allows us to handle a lot more activity, in a given time. But the consequence to that is that we lose out on maybe potential talent that could be suitable for opportunities that we're trying to fill. And those
Mm.
companies who are trying to identify those talents, they may not receive the benefits of those talents
Yeah.
because they're being eliminated before they're even being considered.
Okay, awesome. So let me ask you the last question. I hope because we're really having a great time here. If you had a magic wand to fix just one thing in quantum management research consulting that is holding you down or slowing you back, what would that one thing be?
Yeah, that's also a loaded question too. I How I do things, Phoebe, is basically I try to look at root cause situations. In other words, try to find a central focus or problem or issue, and if you're successful in identifying that, then that has the ability to kind of have a multiplier effect and affect other things. It's kind of like it's like a tree. You got the trunk and you got the branches, but if you can isolate the trunk, as an issue or a problem or challenge, and deal with that successfully, then ultimately it's going to branch off into the branches and deal with the other smaller issues. But the success is that you've found the root cause. And so in my case, that will probably be really, I wouldn't call it a problem, but just more so something that I would like to perfect. And that's being able to identify and source the best possible talent, in a way that is both cost beneficial, but also effective in allowing me to reach out and connect with those individuals that are passively open to and looking for opportunities for my clients. I think if I'm successful with that, then that will help me as a business development professional when I'm trying to develop and cultivate new relationships with companies, because I'm able to present them with highly qualified individuals that they may have an interest in talking to, and also to for me being able to obviously continue and scale my practice in such a way that I can generate such activity.
Awesome, great, well said. Thank you, Larry, and we're very grateful to have you in our podcast today. Really enjoy our time with you and your energy. Like you see me, I was nodding, and to tell you, I'll give you your flowers in
Sure.
everything in your services. We really enjoyed it, and again, we say thank you for honoring our invitation. Okay, and viewers, this is where we come to an end today with our guest Larry Chism, and I'm sure most of us will get a lot from what he shared today. And we say thank you, Larry, for being a podcast today.
So thank you
Thank
for
you.
having me.